So we'll have Malorie Polster and Joshua Ogbuefi from the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. So we'll make sure we'll get their slides up here and ready to go, and we'll have them take it away.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for that question. That's a great transition as I'm about to talk about the physical activity guidelines for Americans. So I am here today from the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, or ODPHP, within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And as Esther said, joined by my colleague Joshua Ogbuefi. And we are really excited to share more about some of our policies and resources that can help you in your efforts to improve youth physical activity levels. So among other things, our office leads the development of the physical activity guidelines for Americans. So I'll start with a little background there. Great, and I'll see if we can actually go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So the physical activity guidelines for Americans was first issued in 2008, and it was the first comprehensive guidance on physical activity from the federal government. It is based on an extensive systematic literature review conducted by a federal advisory committee and provides science-based advice on how those ages 6 and older can be physically active to help promote health and reduce the risk of chronic disease. 5 years after the first edition, HHS released a mid-course report which focused on how to get youth more active. And then 5 years after that, we released the second edition of the physical activity guidelines, which reflects the expanded evidence base and the latest science. So some of what's different in that second edition would be the inclusion of even more benefits of physical activity, including those immediate benefits we've discussed, like reduce anxiety or improve quality of sleep that can happen after just an acute bout of physical activity. The second edition also added recommendations for preschool age children, ages 3 to 5, and that was an age group that was not included in the first edition. And then lastly, the second edition removed the minimum requirement of a 10-minute bout of physical activity. So really encouraging Americans to move more throughout the day, and that any movement, any amount of physical activity can help contribute towards meeting the guidelines. And you'll see the importance of this message when Joshua speaks more about the Move Your Way campaign later. So on the next slide, you'll see the messages of the physical activity guidelines are broken down by population group. But since youth are our focus for today, I'm going to highlight the key guidelines for youth on the next slide. So here's where our dosage comes in. So the key guidelines for children and adolescents age 6 to 17, these are unchanged from the first edition. Youth need 60 minutes or more a day of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity, with most of that being aerobic physical activity. But as part of that 60 minutes, they also should do activities that are muscle strengthening and bone strengthening on 3 or more days a week. So like jumping or climbing on a playground. And one great way that youth can work towards meeting the guidelines and also learn to move in different ways is through sports. So on the next slide, I've got some of the benefits, a lot of which have already been highlighted today, of both physical activity and youth sports participation. So on the physical activity side, for youth, there are benefits related to bone and heart health, cardiorespiratory and muscular fitness, and then of course, brain health, which has been a big focus of today so far. And then sports participation can provide additional benefits beyond those related to physical activity. So some of those psychosocial benefits like confidence, interpersonal and relationship skills, teamwork and leadership, and then some of those life skills which have been mentioned too, like goal setting and time management. But despite these benefits, many youth are not meeting the guidelines, and we know that not all youth have the same access and opportunities to places to get active and play sports. So on the next slide, I've pulled data from 4 Healthy People 2030 objectives to provide just a snapshot of youth physical activity. So some of these say children and some of these say adolescents. So I'll clarify the ages we're talking about here. So the first one looking at children, so ages 6 to 13, only about a quarter meet the aerobic physical activity guideline. Then for high school age adolescents, the percentage is even lower, with about 23% meeting the aerobic recommendation. And these first two, I'm highlighting the aerobic recommendation. Of course, cycling is a great way for youth to get aerobic physical activity, but do want to emphasize that, the aerobic component is just one component. So even fewer youth are meeting both the aerobic and muscle strengthening recommendations. And then looking at the next data point, a little over half of children and adolescents ages 6 to 17 participate in sports. And lastly, only about 40% of adolescents ages 12 to 17 walk or bike to get places. So you can learn more about each of these data sources and explore other physical activity objectives on the Healthy People 2030 website. But when thinking about these data, we also really need to consider breaking these out by different demographic groups to better understand disparities in access. So the next slide, if we want to look at youth sports participation as an example, is a figure based on data from the National Survey of Children's Health, which highlights just a few of the disparities in youth sports participation. So this figure shows how girls, racial and ethnic minorities, and youth from lower income households are less likely to participate than their peers. And that is where we have come in with the National Youth Sports Strategy. So you can go to one more, next slide, perfect. So the National Youth Sports Strategy vision is that one day all youth will have the opportunity, motivation, and access to play sports. And on the next slide, you'll see this framework that's in the National Youth Sports Strategy. And it's based on a social ecological model, kind of outlining how different levels of the youth sports system can be involved in improving the youth sports landscape and helping move the needle towards that vision. So from the innermost ring to the youth themselves, all the way up to those higher public policy levels. And at each level, wherever you fall, you may fall in more than one. The National Youth Sports Strategy gives a list of actions that you can take to help ensure that sports are safe, fun, inclusive, developmentally appropriate, and accessible for all youth. And if I'm seeing the hearts come in as the vision came up. So if your organization's work aligns with the vision of the National Youth Sports Strategy, if you're working to increase access to or improve the quality of cycling programs for youth, we encourage you to apply to become a National Youth Sports Strategy Champion or NYSS Champion. This is our partnership initiative and the main way we recognize and engage with organizations. NYSS Champions range in size from national to local. They're different types of organizations like academic institutions, foundations, youth sports organizations. We're proud, of course, to have Outride as an NYSS champion, but of our over 200 NYSS champions, we only have 3 cycling organizations. So really encourage you to apply so we can learn more about the great work that you all are doing. And on the next slide, I'll share just one additional way that you all can get involved beyond becoming an NYSS champion, which would be to explore and share National Youth Sports Strategy resources. The About the National Youth Sports Strategy page on health.gov has a range of resources that you can use. There's a partner promotion toolkit with sample social media messages and graphics. There are great resources from the 2020-2021 President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition Science Board. And you can also find a tip sheet that coaches, parents, and implementers of youth sports programs can use to support mental health through sports. We'll also be having a National Youth Sports Strategy workshop this afternoon during the first set of parallel sessions. So we hope you'll join us for that. And if you want to go to that session on the conference app, you can also find a handout with all the resources I've shared so far, all the links to everything, and everything that Joshua is going to cover in a moment. So the last one on this slide is that you can find our sport-specific Move Your Way resources, but I will not cover those because Joshua is going to dive a lot deeper into the Move Your Way campaign. So I'll turn it over to you, Joshua.
Thanks, Mallory. Next slide, please. So the Move Your Way campaign is the communications campaign for the physical activity guidelines and was released alongside the guidelines in 2018. Move Your Way aims to increase awareness and knowledge of the guidelines and change consumer behavior. The campaign focuses on physical activity contemplators, or those who are not yet active but aim to get active in the next 6 months. Next slide, please. The Move Your Way campaign is rooted in theory and scientific literature, and audience research was a critical part of the development and expansion of the campaign. The Move Your Way campaign is guided by 3 models: the social ecological model, the trans-theoretical model, and the community-based prevention marketing framework, which explain the why, the who, and the how of this important work. We use a combination of online surveys, focus groups, in-depth interviews, and usability testing sessions to inform the materials to make sure that they are tailored and tailored to the intended audience. And our process is cyclical. We continue to conduct research and develop additional materials for new audiences. Next slide, please. The Movie Rate campaign includes over 80 free resources like fact sheets, videos, posters, and interactive tools, and social media graphics, all available in English and Spanish. And these resources are tailored to different audiences, including kids and teens and parents. Materials emphasize that all sorts of activities count and highlight strategies for overcoming common barriers. And today I'll highlight Movie Rate materials focused on youth and their caregivers. Next slide, please. Once more. Thank you. Our youth materials include fact sheets, posters, and videos. The materials for kids feature bright, fun colors and characters, which we found kids reacted to positively in testing. We also emphasize the benefits of physical activity for improving grades, which kids also found to be important. Recently, we developed 3 teen videos as part of a Movie Way Teen Challenge. The videos speak to the benefits of physical activity, including mental health, and highlight getting active as something that can be done socially. We found that these aspects of physical activity resonate with teens. Next slide, please. We also have materials to help parents and caregivers understand the amounts and types of physical activity kids need to be healthy, highlight the benefits of sports and physical activity, and offer tips for helping kids get active. Next slide, please. So how might you use Move Your Way in your community? ODPHP has been working with community organizations over the past 3 years to test out campaign implementation in communities across the United States. From 2019 to 2021, ODPHP collaborated with 10 communities, working with public health departments, active transportation organizations, parks and recreation departments, and community health coalitions to implement the campaign in different local communities. Next slide, please. In 2020, the Siouxland District Health Department worked with ODPHP to implement the campaign in Sioux City, Iowa. Their campaign implementation incorporated a number of environmental design initiatives. For example, Move Your Way yard signs and wayfinding signage were added alongside various trails to communicate about remaining mileage and to discuss the physical activity recommendations for adults and kids and teens. Additionally, bench workout signs were used to encourage activity near park benches. Next slide, please. Other pilots in 2020 focused some of their campaign implementation efforts on cycling programming and promotion. Columbus Public Health partnered with Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission on their People Who Bike campaign, which aims to break down biking stereotypes and celebrate cyclists. Columbus Public Health and the Regional Planning Commission developed a digital passport where people could record their bike rides and submit them for a chance to win prizes. Columbus Public Health also partnered with coalitions to distribute Movie Way materials alongside helmets to local kids. And in Kansas, Bike Walk KC, a nonprofit focused on making Kansas City safer and more accessible for biking, walking, and living, worked with ODPHP to implement the campaign in their community. To launch their campaign, Bike Walk KC worked with Nurture KC to give away bike helmets to kids in their community during National Bike Month. Bike Walk KC also developed Movie Way themed educational videos about biking and biking safety. Next slide, please. The experiences of these community pilots and others helped inform a Move Your Way community playbook, which is the campaign's implementation guide. In the playbook, you'll find information to help you implement the campaign, like how to connect with local partners and find new ways to collaborate, secure funding and leverage existing community resources, engage with community members through events and social media activities, and evaluate your activities to improve future physical activity initiatives. One of the great things about the playbook is that you can use the whole resource from beginning to end, or you can pick and choose resources that are most helpful to you and your team. Over the years, we've added new resources and updated content based on research. The playbook is a living resource, which will continue to improve and expand along with the campaign. Next slide, please. Move Your Way is adaptable and can be used to start new physical activity initiatives, support existing ones, or help relaunch former programs. You can use Move Your Way to help engage different audiences and engage the whole community to get active. Whether that's hosting a social media challenge for the most time spent biking, handing out fact sheets at a community bike workshop or your next bike to school day, or maybe planning a bike around the city 5K featuring Move Your Way mile markers. There's so many ways you can implement the campaign and help get people moving. And now it's time to implement your way. Next slide.
Great. Well, thank you both for an engaging and exciting presentation. I think there's so many amazing resources here that everyone on both on Whova and Zoom are really excited about these resources and how to put them into action. So I'm sure you'll have a whole influx of people curious about how to become NYSS Champ partners as well. And so just for kind of a first question, I know you gave some examples of Bike Walk KC and some other ways that people have implemented Move Your Way. And I know you just mentioned a couple examples there at the end, but what are some ways that a lot of these youth organizations focused on cycling might be able to put this into action across the country?
Yes, so I think a big part of what community organizations or youth-focused organizations can really look to do when kind of engaging youth in their community is finding ways to, engage the youth specifically for ways they want to implement a campaign in their community. I think youth have a lot of ideas about how they can get their peers active, and so understanding what they would like to do with a cycling program could be the best next step for a community organization.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm just hearing here that everyone is asking, where can we get these materials? And I just saw that you all have put a slide here. So this is kind of the hot off the press materials that everyone can access here. And as Mallory mentioned, there is a workshop again this afternoon that you can look for on Whova in order to actually actively brainstorm with some of your peers here to really kind of think about putting these ideas into action. And so, Mallory, a question for you is, how might you see some of the youth cycling organizations here getting involved on the National Youth Sports Strategy side?
Yeah, well, I think, the big part of us, one of the reasons why we created this partnership network of NYSS champions is because it's going to take a collaborative effort. Different types of organizations, different sports, different sectors, everyone kind of has a role to play here. So I think getting outside the bubble, everyone is doing this great work, but how can we connect to share resources, to not recreate the wheel, to learn from each other? I think everyone here would read the National Youth Sports Strategy and probably say, we're already doing these things. We agree with everything in here. But there are barriers to putting some of these best practices into place. So really connecting with others to try to overcome some of those barriers. And we can work through that if you come to the workshop this afternoon. But I will flag too, if you are not available for the workshop, but you can go to that event in the Whova app, definitely check out. There's a handout with all the links to everything we included in this presentation, including all the Move Your Way resources, the link to the Move Your Way playbook, everything that everyone's asking about in the chat. So that's all there for you all.
Well, I know we're out of time here for this session, but thank you both. This was a very engaging and informative presentation. I'm sure everyone is really excited to dig through those materials, share them with students and parents and beyond. So thanks again for your time, and we'll see you again this afternoon for the workshops.